folks, welcome back aboard our Pacific Sea craft Orion 27. In between rain and snow here in May, I've finished installing these new handrails. There are 2 fore and 2 aft. I've also rebedded my winches and sail track, and I've installed some new trim around my sea hood and cabin entry. We'll get into all that in this video. Well, the inspiration for replacing handrails actually originated in late September on Lake Superior in 2023. We had 2 days of steady rain, and we were sleeping in here in the salon area, and apparently water had leaked in from the handrails onto this vinyl headliner, followed the headliner to the ceiling over here, and started dripping on my head while I was sleeping on the salon. And of course, middle of the night, I investigated with my moisture meter and found this area was wet coming back to the handrail. So the first thing I did when I got back home here in Colorado is follow the deck and the ceilings with my moisture meter to identify what areas were wet. Primarily that was several points along the handrails. So anyway, on we were to replacing handrails to solve that problem. Although I just mentioned just handrails, I decided at that point, this is a 40-year-old boat, or actually 46. Whatever's been was bedded there originally probably needs rebedding. So I decided, well, we probably should do the rest of the deck fittings. But first, let's talk about handrails. The original overhead covering on Orion's is this vinyl that unzips. And behind here, you can see there's a layer of foam, and underneath there, in the back, are the nuts that come down from the bolts that hold the handrails down on the deck. And that's true for both fore and aft handliners. There's another zipper here. And the same thing on the starboard side of the boat, running fore to aft. Now, by the way, a lot of times these zippers are nylon, but they get cranky with buildup of, I don't know, salt or other crud. So I run a piece of candle wax, or in my case, bandsaw wax that I had. And after a few strokes back and forth, that zipper runs real smooth. Now, there's a problem in the head, though, with regard to access. Let's go take a look. So proceeding forward here, I mentioned the head is a different issue. In the head there are no zippers, and in order to access the, I think it was 2 bolts here for the handrail, I had to remove my light, of course, and this hook. But then most importantly, I had to remove this teak strip and pull some staples, and they were all rusty on either side there, so that I can just peel away that vinyl to access those bolts there. The other issue with regard to handrail access is, as you might imagine, a handrail runs behind this vent that goes up to the Dorade vent. So I had to remove this teak and of course that light over there. But anyway, the key thing here, there's 4 bolts, or actually there's screws that go up through the teak into the it's a strip of wood up there. So anyway, I had to remove that, and then once I removed this piece of teak, I had to remove staples in the headliner, and then I could finally access the bolt that's back behind there. It's the only way I could really reach that. There are 2 sets of handrails. There are 2 forward rails. They have 5 loops in them, and then there are 2 towards the aft, and they have 4 loops. Okay, for those of you not accustomed to the jargon here, this is a loop in a handrail, and this is a foot as well as that. What I show here is what these bolts look like going through the handrail. I've knotted on a piece of butyl tape, which will be used to seal up the deck to handrail hole. And the other thing I wanted to mention is replacing the panhead style with a flathead style, and also these are a Phillips head instead of a slot head. And the principal reason why I'm going with the flathead is because the this head will sink down into this countersink hole and produce a flat surface for my flat surfaced teak plug. So I'll have good contact there, and even more grip going around between the plug and the hole. So the first thing I need to do is to get at the heads of the bolts on top of the handrails, chipping out the wood plugs with a slot screwdriver. And some of the plugs were already missing. Several others, they were easily removed because there was actually rot around the plug, and a dark area around the plug indicates there's rot and likely water intrusion. Now, if I was to reuse this rail, I would either need to drill out a larger hole to get to good wood and get the next size up a larger plug, or perhaps use some thickened epoxy to keep the plug in place. In some places where the feet of the handrails were in contact with the deck, there was a dark stain on the deck, and I think that's due to rot from water leaking through the handrail. Now, in some, perhaps a half dozen of these cases, I found the nuts at the bottom of these 1/4 inch, 3.5 long bolts. They were frozen due to rust. I had my wife hold a slot screwdriver on these heads. These were panhead heads, and as you can imagine, it's not too hard to bugger up those. So now at this point, I can't get the bolt out. Now, in some cases, there's enough clearance here opening up the liner to use a carbide blade on my multi-tool to get at those nuts and cut them off. In some cases I couldn't. There's just not enough clearance without ripping the vinyl off here. I didn't want to go through that effort. So I went up aboard and I had to go into the handrail and cut bolts off just above the deck. Well, at that point, it definitely means I'll have to replace a handrail with a new one. But I wasn't happy with as much rot I was seeing at the feet of these handrails, so new ones were on order, and they're pretty easy to find on the internet. They run about 60 to 70 bucks each. Okay, handrails aside, the worst leaks I found into the deck actually came from the teak trim around the sea hood and hatch. So from inside the cabin, I drilled a few extra holes into the fiberglass on the bottom side of the deck sandwich around the wet holes, not to the extent of weakening the deck. So I did this elsewhere where drilling showed some core in the deck to be wet. Alright, so when I'm referring to deck sandwich, this disc, by the way, came from my access for the diesel heater exhaust pipe. And what we're talking about here is this top layer is 3/16 inch fiberglass. Under that is 3/8 inch of balsa core, and then again 3/16 inch layer of fiberglass. So I started doing this work in October. My plan was to let the spots, the wet spots, dry out in our climate. This boat will be covered over the winter months, and my hope is that by late spring, a good bit of the moisture in this wet deck will be gone. Now, Andy at Boatworks today, the YouTube channel, said, "Good luck with that, bud." So he's in a considerably colder, more humid climate, so maybe I'll be a bit luckier than he was. Anyway, fast forward several months later, actually 8 or 9 at this point, the wet spots are drier, but they're still a little wet. So I'm going to leave those extra holes on the bottom side of that deck sandwich open, that's on the cabin side, in hopes of continued drying. Now, since I'm installing new handrails, it gave me an opportunity to improve what I think wasn't a good installation, or it could be better, I should say, and that's that the handrail bolt they originally put in here, although it's somewhat centered on the foot, happens to be pretty close to where this curvature starts on this handrail, and that leads to potential, wood breaking off and this plug loosening up, allowing water in. So I moved my, as you can see here with this plug, I moved my hole further back into the handrail, and although it's not centered on the foot, it does give, I think, better durability for this plug. So now, here are a series of steps I followed when rebedding the handrails, or I should say installing the handrails, since I'm doing new handrails. Feel free to stop here if you want to read over the text if you like. I derived this procedure from articles I've read and from videos. I'll be following most of these steps when rebedding the other deck hardware, and the key point here among all of this is to keep the deck sandwich from getting wet. After removing the old bolts, I drilled out a larger diameter hole than the original hole. For instance, the bolts holding down the handrails are 1/4 inch. And most all the holes I drilled out after this, following this process, became 5/16 to 3/8 inch diameter holes. Now, if the drill brings up wet wood, my approach is to keep going to a larger drill bit. I don't know what the limits to this approach is, but I didn't need to do any larger than about a 1/2 inch or so. Hopefully we'll get some feedback, comments on this from others watching this. As I mentioned earlier, I paused here for many months before going on to the next steps to let the holes dry out. If I was reusing my handrails, the old ones, now would be a good time to label them so I wouldn't have to figure out which one went where later on. That way the holes would definitely be lining up. Next, I duct tape the bottom of the hole inside the cabin. Duct tape is sticky and seals well, and I'll be filling these holes with thickened epoxy, and I trust this tape will be good enough to keep any epoxy from leaking out of the hole and into the cabin, but I'll definitely be double checking. Next, I poured thickened epoxy into the holes, but it's thickened only to the point where it's still pourable. Since it takes the epoxy several minutes to settle down into the holes, I'll move on to the other holes and then come back and revisit each hole again and refill it. For ordinarily, the next thing I do would be to remove the duct tape at the bottom of the holes and drill 1/4 inch holes into the cured epoxy for the handrails. But because I'm replacing handrails, I will not be re-drilling into these holes because these holes might not line up with the holes I put in the new handrails. So what I did do is I drilled new holes in the new handrails. I used my drill mill to get a good vertical hole centered into the center of the foot at the end, at the base of each loop, and with the exception of the end loop. So now, after drilling each 1/4 inch hole through the rail for the bolts, I followed at the top of the handrail with a larger bit, drilling down about a 1/4 inch. That'll allow quarter sinking the heads of the bolts into the teak. And I'm also going to be using flathead bolts. That way I'll get a maybe 3/16 inch or so of teak plug over the bolt heads. Okay, now back onto the boat. Although I cleaned the gel coat after I removed the old handrail, I could still see where the old handrail met the deck. So starting with that, the aft end of the handrails, I placed a new handrail at that location and then drilled a 1/4 inch hole using that hole that already exists in this new handrail as a guide. I secured this bolt just temporarily. So since the cabin top here is curved and the rail is straight, what I had to do was sequentially go along, putting in bolts, drilling into the cabin, and press my knee into the handrail towards the center of the boat so that I could curve that handrail to match the curvature of the cabin top here. So after getting all the loops down, I pulled the handrail off, then went back with a larger bit, a 5/16 bit, into the 1/4 inch holes that I just drilled with this new handrail. And then I went back and taped the bottom of the holes and filled these holes. A couple days later, removed the tape from the inside of the cabin and drilled 1/4 inch holes into the cured epoxy holes. I slightly chamfered the top of the holes with a countersink bit. This both improves the hole receiving the sealant, will be butyl tape, and also reduces the tendency to craze the gel coat. With the bolts through the handrail secured, I applied some old varnish on the teak plugs and then tapped them in. You'll want to line up the grain in the plug with that of the rail. That'll be important when chipping off the excess plug, especially on a curved surface like a handrail. What I'm showing here is what I did on the cap rail around the C-hood. Anyway, another plus is that it'll look nicer in the end. Now, sometimes the wood you chip off takes off some wood below the surface on the handrail and the plug. So in that case, I came back with some epoxy-based filler here. This is Total Boat. and I dyed the mixture. It's a type A and type B, so equal weight compound, equal volume compound, the material, but it tends to be really light, so I used the brown dye to somewhat color match the rail. Now on the inside of the cabin, I had to replace the teak grills over the dorade vents. And here, these teak dorade vents are really dark, and my brown didn't work. When I was talking about brown dye, I was using with epoxy-based filler. So I used Varathane's color pens to match the dark stain on the teak. Then I varnished the teak, and it came out quite well. As I mentioned, I had some teak around the sea hood and the cabin entry that was in bad shape. But some good sanding and some places where I had to replace some wood, I used Total Boat wood filler, and that did a good job. So for the one piece that was beyond repair, I happened to go over the longitudinal direction on the boat, so it had to be curved. What I wound up doing is buying a 3-foot long, 4-inch wide, 1/2-inch piece of teak lumber, and of course that's straight. I tried to bend it into shape. First I put it in hot water for several hours, most of the day actually. Took it out and tried to bend it into shape, but it sprung back straight after about a day, so I could see that wasn't going to work. So what I did do that worked was split the wood into 2 1/4-inch pieces, 1/4-inch thick pieces I should say. I coated both where they would touch each other with thickened epoxy, and then I pressed these 2 pieces into shape, and I figured out a desired bend using these leg ingots here. Now this did work. After removing the excess epoxy, I think I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. I also rebedded other deck hardware, including the winches, the traveler for the mainsail, and I followed the same procedure of drilling out old holes, filling with thickened epoxy, and then re-drilling holes into the thickened epoxy to finally mount this hardware. Well, that's about it on this job, although there are several other deck-mounted items I should rebed soon. So next video we'll be taking a tour of the interior Soteria and go through some of the enhancements we have on board, including plumbing, water heater, fridge, pad, and so forth. And also, I started making this list. I took a schematic of our boat and here in handwriting for now, started identifying where things are stored. It's nothing like a good list to find things that you're looking for in quick order, as long as you put them back where you found them. Anyway, that's coming up next. In the meantime, safe travels to you and good luck on your projects. We'll see you next time.